This may or may not be a shorter review. I wouldn't know, as these are the very first lines I'm typing out for it, but it would certainly be in line with just how short and simple this game turned out to be. But that doesn't mean there's nothing of substance to talk about here, far from it. There's a lot of interesting choices made regarding this game, and I at least find it interesting enough to talk about in a YouTube video. Maybe don't use it as a conversation starter at a party though. It might not work so well there, cause this game gets weird. This is Felvidek. If you can't already tell, this game has a very particular art style. I'm not really sure what to call it if I'm being honest. The cutscenes have this early to mid PS1 vibe to them with the polygons that everyone is rendered in, but as for the rest of the game, I'm not sure. The closest comparison I can think of is Hylics, where the art is weirdly detailed but everything appears to be off-model or uncanny. Everything just seems kinda off and creepy, which seems to be intentional. You do get used to it after a while, but it seems the dev, I think it's one guy at least, made sure to pace things out in such a way that you're always about to be surprised by something new just as you thought you had the game figured out. The sound, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. The sound mostly consists of these funky digital rock tunes for action and calm, relaxing ambient music for wandering around the region of Felvidek. There's a contrast to it that you'd think would be jarring, and it is, yet again, you get used to it and it starts to just work, to quote a certain Todd Howard. It's weird. But on the subject of wandering around Felvidek itself, let's discuss the story. So, a few days ago, as of writing this, I went into the Steam discussion forums, big mistake, and I saw a post from someone getting really upset about potential historical inaccuracies with the game, such as how the game's setting, Slovakia, wasn't a real country back in the 15th century. The dev then responded, explaining how Felvidek is meant more as an alternate history or fantasy version of 15th century Slovakia, and also that, just because they didn't have an official nation state, the Slovak people, his people, still lived there. So we're dealing with something interesting here. As I said, the game takes place in 15th century Slovakia, specifically the titular region of Felvidek. You play as Pavel, a drunk knight who notices the ruins of a nearby castle burst into flames for a moment. Upon alerting the local lord of the situation, Pavel is sent off with a priest named Matej, at least I think that's how you pronounce it, to figure out what's going on, leading them down a rabbit hole of political conspiracies, satanic cults, and general dark humor in their mission to solve the mystery and save Felvidek from disaster. Overall, I actually ended up getting really engaged with the story. The game is only about 5 hours long depending on how much you explore and do side quests, so the story moves along at a very prompt pace. preventing you from ever truly getting bored, as you'll soon either hit a big plot twist, or an interesting encounter, or even just some funny dialogue. Speaking of plot, I'm only using footage from about the first 2 hours of the game so as to not spoil any too major plot twists, as the game does pick up pretty quick after about hour 3. Now, I do have to bring up the language thing that you may have noticed if you're actually watching the video. The English translation of this game is intentionally written in a very old Shakespearean kind of English. It's so densely written, in fact, that even I found it kind of difficult to decipher what some of these guys were saying sometimes, and I'm a native speaker. I imagine the other translations are similar, as I also imagine the Slovak version is like this too, so be aware going in that you might be in for a rough time trying to read it. Sometimes your mind just kinda glazes over after a while, reading so many thys, these, and thous, it all starts to blend together. Pavel and Matej are really well-written characters though, with Pavel being this brash, drunken knight trying to find his lover, with Matej, the attentive priest that he is, constantly attempting to bring Pavel some restraint. At the very least, to get him to abstain from drinking so much. And yes, drinks are a major plot point later. Ironically, their dynamic feels more like a sibling one than a father-son one, with Matej being the older sibling and trying to guide Pavel along a leash. Though we do get moments where Matej's the one lashing out, and when he lashes out, he really goes for it. Mostly through words. Mostly. The gameplay is a fairly simplistic affair, though that doesn't mean it's without any merit. I've heard rumblings of people describing it as a JRPG, which, yeah, the combat and character management play kinda like an old school Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy game, even the menus. But there are some differences. For one, the art. I mean, just look at it. But secondly, the game has no leveling system. Your strength in combat is determined entirely by the quality of your gear, increasing your health, tools, aka mana, and stats, as well as changing what sorts of combat abilities you have. Because of this, your characters don't feel all that unique in combat, save for a few abilities that they always have, like how Matej has his prayer heal skill. Regardless, I don't know if it's just the general style of the game or what, but it reminds me a lot of Earthbound. There's just this air of weirdness to everything that made me feel like I was kind of floating through combat sometimes. I should point out though that the lack of a leveling system actually stops this game from being a grind. Since there's no level to grind for, that means there's no random encounters, which means every fight in the game does something to move the plot forward, from forced losses to joke battles, easy victories, or genuine challenges. It's part of what ensures that the game maintains a good pace rather than overstaying its welcome. Another part of that comes from the rather limited environment you explore. There's only a select few areas you can go to and explore, so even if you manage to get lost, you'll find the plot again soon enough, especially since most side quests will actually lead you back to the main quest somehow. It all feels very carefully put together to build something short and to the point, which could be a good or bad thing depending on what sort of RPG you want. But I found no real issues with this one. And that is Felvidek. It's certainly a weird one. I feel like the description of medieval Hylix is both accurate and not accurate, since Hylix just operates on total moon logic, whereas Felvidek mainly just looks weird. You can pretty safely piece together what's going on with what clues are presented to you, and it makes for a pretty interesting video game equivalent to a short story. And given that it's only about $10.99, I'd say it's a pretty good game to get. This has been TheRatMan, and I will see you all later. And lastly, a special thank you shout out to Mike Uniturtle and Reese. Thank you.